We have big breaking news today on a clear and decisive defeat for the Trump administration and an equally clear and decisive win for the First Amendment. The Trump Justice Department has announced that it is withdrawing subpoenas issued to 5 reporters from the New York Times. The subpoenas would have compelled those journalists to testify before a grand jury. It came after a hearing in court in which the Times asked a judge to quash the subpoenas, and according to reporting from our colleagues Lisa Rubin and Fallon Gallagher, the judge blasted the Justice Department, telling prosecutors that they had a choice. They could either withdraw the subpoenas or he would quash them himself. For its part, the New York Times has been arguing that the White House is abusing the justice system to fish for its reporters' sources and deter coverage. They've also alleged in court documents that the FBI sought the phone records for reporters and the spouses of 2 reporters and the mother of 1 journalist without initially disclosing it. All of this started when Donald Trump allegedly got very upset when the New York Times reported that he had left Turkey on the old Air Force One because a new plane gifted by the Qataris was not deemed secure enough. And that breaking news is where we begin today with some of our most favorite experts and friends. Former top DOJ official and general counsel for the FBI, our legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is here. Also joining us, former DHS Chief of Staff during Trump's first term, Miles Taylor's back, and former director of the CIA, now our senior national security and intelligence analyst, John Brennan is here. Andrew Weissmann, I start with you because this is, you worked at the highest levels of the department, and this is a really clear legal defeat for Todd Blanche personally, who testified in his confirmation hearing that he called the code red.
So let's put this in the context of the Department of Justice issuing grand jury subpoenas to the Federal Reserve and issuing grand jury subpoenas in connection with the sitting governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis. The reason I'm raising all of those is those were all examples of where the court has said these subpoenas are improper and illegal and were quashed. And to me, there's sort of 2 stories here. One is that you have Todd Blanche on the verge of a confirmation where he has shown both illegality and at sort of incompetence, if this was like now saying it was some mistake. But you have judges pushing back repeatedly. And the second story is where in God's green earth are the senators and the outrage where, if again, I hate to do this sort of like in any other administration, but could you imagine that what would happen in any other administration, Republican or Democratic, where you have this and the person who is responsible is seeking to get a promotion?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Weissmann, I'll do the in any other information, and I'll do in any other outlet. I mean, if it were Fox News, if it were Tucker Carlson's podcast, if it were any other outlet, Republicans would be jumping up and down screaming about the First Amendment. Some of their most powerful and prolific voices were screaming the loudest about the First Amendment. The silence is deafening from the right.
And so just to make sure people understand, having been at the department and both at sort of the attorney side and working at the FBI, the amount of scrutiny that is supposed to go on before you would issue subpoenas like this to reporters, to their spouses, to the mother of a reporter, this is either just intentionally lawless or just such a gross screw up that this is one where, you know, if you're a supervisor, you are saying, how could this possibly happen? But here, this is all playing out while the person who, you know, where the buck is supposed to stop with, which is Todd Blanche, it is happening while he is saying, I want to become the attorney general. Engaging in this kind of either lawless and or erratic behavior that just would be unacceptable in any other administration.
Director Brennan, I remember the State Department preparing briefings for for obviously the president, but also senior staff when we would travel abroad. And one of the things you would be briefed on is how said government treats journalists in the country, right? Like if you were going to an autocratic country, there would be a little section. I mean, America now forever under this administration has in that section for anyone coming here from parts abroad that the acting attorney general nominee to be the attorney general sought to subpoena 5 journalists to testify before a grand jury and was only stopped by a judge.
Yes, Nicole, it just shows how different this administration is from the administrations that we used to work for. And first of all, I really want to compliment the New York Times reporters who published this story, which is exactly the reason why we have a fourth estate, is to expose government corruption, incompetence, and national security. And it seems like this is all three in terms of the dangers that were presented when Donald Trump was riding on that new jet that was provided by the Qatari government. And it's not just the threat of missiles or the type of defensive measures that this aircraft didn't have. It's also the technical surveillance capabilities of adversaries around the globe that can collect against a flying platform like Air Force One. So absolutely the right thing to do. Secondly, it's quite clear that moving toward these subpoenas without doing their own internal housekeeping and seeing what needed to be done in terms of trying to prevent any unauthorized leaks, it just shows that their first inclination is to use the capabilities of the Justice Department and abuse the authorities. And who was involved in this? As Andrew pointed out, Todd Blanche, but also who was the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York? Jay Clayton signed off on these subpoenas. And so it just shows that the Trump administration sees the Department of Justice as its own aggressive law firm that is going to do everything possible to, aggressively pursue all of its enemies, including the fourth estate, the media, the ones that are really, it's a pillar of this country's democracy. And so I'm so glad that the judge gave a real ultimatum to the administration. But also, I would think, maybe Todd Blanche is not going to appeal this because he recognizes that his, nomination is on the line, which is why he met with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. So, again, it's just so surreal. As we said, we shouldn't be astounded by these things, but I think continuously we are.
Let me do what you just did and go back to the reporting with you, Director Brennan. It was about the Qatari gifted Air Force One. And it was a story that the first paragraph was probably written when Trump told that big lie that what he was going to do with the Qatari gifted plane was send it on a tour so that military members stationed overseas could look at it. That was the story Trump told. So if you sat down and had to write that, it is your job as a journalist to check your sources and make sure that was true. So like all Trump stories, like all Trump debacles, like all authoritarian punches that they try to throw, it starts with a lie told by Donald Trump in front of all the cameras at the NATO summit.
Yeah, he gets himself into these, pickles by continuously lying, and he cannot tell the truth even if his life depended on it. And so therefore the misrepresentation of the facts. And there's still a question about what he plans to do or would like to do with that jet after he leaves office. And so again, the journalists did exactly the right thing. And I'm glad that these subpoenas have been quashed, because I'm hoping it's going to encourage other journalists to continue to pursue and pull these threads when they see stories like this that, again, are going to expose the dishonesty and the corruption and the incompetence of this administration.
Miles, I think you had the best line that the story leaked about why they actually switched planes, and then the investigation into the leak leaked. Your reaction to this decisive legal defeat for Todd Blanche?
Well, that was already, I think, a good sign about the defiance in this country. In fact, Andrew Weissman and I were just talking about this yesterday on defiance.org, is trying to measure the different sectors where we're seeing capitulation or defiance. And this was one of those episodes. As you note, the leak probe itself leaked. And what did that tell us? It told us that people inside the administration, likely inside the FBI, were appalled that they were being directed to do this, that they were being directed to investigate journalists. And within 24 hours, told the New York Times about it. Extraordinary. I've never seen anything quite like that. And that's before, of course, the justice system weighed in with its own act of defiance and worked to quash this. I think that's the good news. The bad news, of course, here is you have a president that is hell-bent on torching the First Amendment of the Constitution. And unfortunately, I have two personal connections to this episode. The first was in the first Trump administration, when I found out that the president was so concerned about leaks from his staff that made him look bad, that he told the White House chief of staff that he wanted to wiretap his staff members. Now, that directive obviously was not followed through on. What I can't tell you today is whether or not that is happening. What I do know from this reporting from the New York Times is that they did go seize the phones of White House staff and staff from other agencies. So Trump is carrying forward those directives in a second term. The second piece is that this may not have happened if the Justice Department had not, as soon as Trump came back into office, rolled back protections for journalists. Attorney General Pam Bondi issued a memo in the first quarter of last year citing the executive orders against myself and Chris Krebs as justification for stripping journalists of their protections and launching these leak probes into journalists. So they've taken away things that the Justice Department used to do to prevent these types of subpoenas from ever reaching a court in the first place. And they may have failed this time, but I'm not going to put it past the administration to try this again and again.